Jimmy Crawford, it's an honor to have you here on the Modern Warrior podcast. You are someone that inspires me through the way that you show up as a father, as a husband, as a man in today's world. I know you've been through plenty of battles on your own. You've also shown up for Georgie when she's going through her battles, and I take incredible admiration from your approach as a husband, as a father, as a man. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you here in the podcast because I feel that your message is something that's going to inspire other husbands, fathers, and men of my podcast to step up and be the men that other people need them to be. And I want to sort of bring it back before we dive deep into fatherhood and being a husband and talk about what seemed to have been an incredible life-changing experience for you back in 2012. You strike me as someone who is a very strong, assertive, resilient man, quite powerful perhaps, based on your experiences as a CEO with Spin FM and all of your incredible accomplishments in your business and career. But then in 2012, you were struck down with a diagnosis of MS.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Gav. I've seen the caliber of guests you've had on the podcast, so it's a privilege to be amongst them. Yeah, so 2nd of February 2012, I was 32 years of age, living at home with my mom. The reason being I had just separated from a partner and I'd moved home. I'd had an apartment. We were living together. That relationship didn't work out. And about a year and a half, 2 years prior to 2012, I'd moved out and moved back home to try and sort of reestablish myself. But at the time, I was CEO of Spin1038 and Spin Southwest. It was 2nd of February. And at that time, if you remember, it was probably the peak recession. I'd been in that role for 4 years. So I was made CEO at the age of 28, which is pretty young. And within 6 months, all the shit hit the fan with the business and with the economy. And I'd been put under massive pressure to readjust, restructure the business, as a 30-year-old man, I didn't, I was still learning the trade to some extent, or learning how to be a CEO. I knew the trade, but I didn't, quite know how to be the CEO at that point. So I had, been through 2 or 3 years of real battle to keep the doors open, keep people in jobs, and sort of help the business survive. And we were coming up to our listenership results, which back then they came out every quarter. So you live quarter to quarter. So if you have a bad result in radio, you're gone, you're fired. That is pretty much the story. You might get 2 or 3 goes at it, but if you're trending downwards, adjustments need to be made and you're moved on. And I remember the board had put a lot of pressure on around probably 2011, and there was definitely a letter sent saying to all the CEOs saying we need to step up our game here. So, as a result, listenership figures are coming out, feeling the pressure. Woke up that morning, and I remember being on my phone in the bed, checking messages and emails, of course, before I get up. Absolutely the wrong thing to do. But I got out of the bed and I remember my hand felt a little bit just awkward, bit uncoordinated or whatever. But like that can happen when you just wake up. So I got into the shower, and I remember just the water feeling really funny on my face as I washed my hair. Like back then I had hair. So I just kind of didn't think anything of it. And I went into work and we started crunching. We got the results around 12 o'clock, started crunching the numbers. And throughout that day, I just felt really off. And then I started to notice that kind of my whole arm at that point had gone weak. It's like that thing when if you squeeze a tennis ball really hard and then you let go of it, you kind of can't push back against your hand gripping the tennis ball, So certain things, like certain movements and things like that on my right side, it just felt weird. And at that point then I started to put my hand on my face, and one whole side of my face was completely numb. Like you could have stuck a cigarette butt into my cheek and I would have probably felt it, but it wouldn't have hurt. I just kind of think this is weird. Went on with it as I did back then, just getting on with things. And I remember leaving the office late that night. We'd gone through the numbers. The results were okay. So there was a bit of relief. Pressure was off. We had a wedding the next day of someone that we worked with, and we were really excited to go to that. I just started a new relationship at that point with Georgie. And I remember going to walk out my office door, and this is one of the more abiding memories that I had. So I just went to grab the door handle, and I missed it completely. My thumb kind of clipped the top of it, and I grabbed the door frame. I just was like, Jesus, this is not normal. I almost felt like I was slightly drunk, that kind of feeling. So then I had the numbness. I had this weird weakness in my arm, and I felt a bit wobbly. I was like, oh, fuck, what's going on here? So I said, look, you're just exhausted. It's the pressure, it's the stress. Back then I used to work 12, 13, 14 hours a day, and, had the old stress badge of honor. I had probably 3 or 4 of them, so like I just kind of shrugged it off and went, I'll be fine. I'll go get a good night's sleep, go to the wedding tomorrow and have a good time. And went to the wedding. Felt okay that day. The kind of symptoms had kind of gone away a bit. The numbness was still there, but the wobbliness had gone. And by kind of 12:30 that night, I just said to Georgie, I need to go to bed. And that was not like me back then. I was always last man standing at a wedding, or one of them, having the crack. And like I burnt the candles at both ends. Whilst I worked hard, I needed that outlet to go out, party, have fun, and, make the most out of my free time, which meant staying out very late into the early hours of the morning and enjoying a few pints. So yeah, I just said, Georgie, you need to go to bed. And we went to bed. And then I was talking to my dad over the weekend, and he just said, go to the doctor and just get it checked. So I went to the doctor, went to the GP. My dad was very health conscious, and he would always be like, just go get it checked. You'll be fine, but just get it checked. He never let you sort of sit with anything. If there's any other injuries I had through sports or anything like that, he's like, go to the physio, go to the doctor, just encourage me to do that and look after my health. So I went, and my GP very abruptly said to me, you either have MS or you've had a stroke. I don't think it's anything else. So at that point I kind of was taken aback, and he said, look, I'm going to send you in to a neurologist in the Hermitage. So I went to who is now my neurologist in the Hermitage, and got checked, and he said, look, I need you to come in and whatever. So 12 years ago this week, I was confirmed diagnosed with MS. So that was a pretty sort of strange time. Obviously, I had with MS, you get the MS I have is called relapse remitting MS. So you have a relapse and then you go into remission. You have a relapse, then you go into remission. And by the time I had gone into hospital, I felt completely normal again. I was fine. The symptoms had gone, and there was no major physical anything going on with me. I was back, running, playing sport, doing all the work in the world that I could get my hands on, and I felt okay. The tiredness was still there a little bit, but put that down to working too hard and all that. So yeah, I went into my neurologist, and he said, look, there's some white spot lesions on your brain. I want to have a look at them. So by the time I went into hospital, there was more, and that was pretty much the confirmation. I'd gone through this process with the neurologist of they're looking for whether it was a stroke or whether it was MS. There's a series of tests for both. And on the right-hand side was the tests for the stroke, the left-hand side tests for MS. We started getting cancellations on a lot of the tests on the right-hand side. So they weren't looking for a stroke. They knew it wasn't that after a few tests. So by the Thursday, which is Thursday, the 15th of March, 2012, the neurologist came in to do a lumbar puncture. And that was the final test. And so I said to him, I was like, you're doing lumbar puncture. So therefore, you're actually looking for MS. And I know that the lumbar puncture test is the confirmation. So can you just tell me now whether I have this or not? And he said, well, I can't confirm because I haven't done the lumbar puncture, but yeah, everything indicates 99% chance that you have MS. And then he was like, now, can you get on the edge of the bed and bend over there while I put this knitting needle into your spinal cord and drain all the fluids and then leave you sitting there for 4 hours without moving? And I said, absolutely not. And I kicked him out of the room, and I went out and I called Georgie and I called my mom and dad and broke down at that point.
What did it mean to you when you received the diagnosis? What was going through your head?
Pure sadness. And, one of the first things that came to me was physical disability. Because that's the image that I had of people with MS in my mind. I knew nothing about it, really. A neighbor of ours had it, and he was in a wheelchair. And obviously that was exceptionally scary. So I just remember feeling a huge amount of panic and just walking down those corridors of the Hermitage clinic straight out into the car park. And I just kept walking in a straight line through the car park along this really narrow footpath. I vividly remember it. And the first sort of fear I had was, what was going to happen to me physically. The second thing a thought I had was, I won't be able to have children now because of the physical. So that was like the secondary thought as a result of the primary thought. So I was walking and I rang my sister, and she had just had her first son, Joshua, and I was his godfather. And I loved, like, Joshua was the kid that made me want to have kids. Not that my brother's kids didn't, but I had got to that point in my life where I'd met someone that I knew I wanted to have kids with. And therefore, Joshua was I was like, right, if I can get a kid like him, happy days. And so then, yeah, that was the big fear, is that, like, I won't be able to have kids. Like, who would want me? I'm broken now. Will Georgie even stay with me? Yeah, those are the things. And then, like, exercise and sport had been a big thing for me my whole life, and I had massive fears, like, I won't be able to run. This is going to affect me walking. A lot of people with MS, their balance is considerably affected, and they need frames, or they need help, assistance walking. So those are all the thoughts. And then off the back of that was, like, I have gone from being the guy handing out the flyers when I was 23 to being made CEO of a massive media business at the age of 28. So in my mind, my career was, like, seriously rocketing, and it was very important to me at the time. And I had thought that I would end up, like, my ultimate job was, like, to run RTE, or, like, be a big wig in Sky or something like that. And I suppose the trajectory of my career was going that direction. So I was like, so then that was where the sadness came as well. When I thought, look, my career's over now, and, like, what am I going to do? Who would want me? I'm broken goods.
It renders you with a sense of powerlessness and a lack of control. And as I said at the beginning of the podcast, you come across as someone who's very assertive and resilient and strong. How did you begin to regain power back into your life after this diagnosis?
It took me a very long time. All I did at the start was bury that problem. So I went through the process of understanding the illness a bit more, understanding what I needed to do, what the prognosis or long-term prognosis was. And at that stage, given all that information that was given to me about that, I decided I was going to bury this and not tell anyone and hide from it. I'm sorry, but not hide from it from myself, but, like, actually I was hiding from it because I wasn't telling anyone. So I kept it all in. I told very close friends and family, and I just got on with life. I made tweaks and adjustments so I wouldn't be at the client dinners on Wednesday night till midnight and then be up the next day at 7 to get into work. I'd go to them, show up and leave early, or just not go, send one of the sales guys or whatever. And like in that business, being out with clients and socializing at that time was a huge, huge part of your success. So you had to do it. It was almost part of the job. It was in the job description. So yeah, I buried it all. And when did the to answer your question, when did the sort of resilience and all that sort of stuff kick in? I wouldn't have a date or a time for it. I just went through the process. And ultimately, I think as I look back on that, it's like a grieving process. You're grieving for your old life. So I'd say realistically with me, that was probably 8 years. And it only came out of that process when I actually opened up and talked about it.
The acceptance piece, was it at the end?
That's the acceptance, yeah. Yeah. So like the denial was the start. That was me burying it, not telling anyone. I went on in work. Everyone in work knew I was gone for 2 weeks and wondered where I'd gone. And they'd known I'd had something wrong with me, but I told them it was nothing. Just a virus. Strange thing, it had gone away now and it was fine. Nobody knew. And like at that point I had gone, all these people were really close. So like everyone in Spin was the same age. We all got boyfriends, girlfriends at the same time, ultimately got married at the same time, did everything together, we went out at weekends together as well, as, you know, that kind of way. So like we had like 4 wedding tables at our wedding of work people. So like we were all really close. So I just felt so weak in that sort of diagnosis that I didn't want people to know, because I felt that they would then not take advantage of me, but maybe not bring their challenges to me. And I was ultimately their manager, so I wouldn't be doing my job properly if they knew and they couldn't bring me stuff.
Too much sympathy and potentially putting a label of victimhood on you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was literally the worst fear I had. It's like, I didn't want to be the victim at all. So I just, in those years that followed, I just, buried it, went through it. I went on to loads of different medications and stuff like that. So I was kind of still just learning about what my course would be. And everyone's course with MS is different. It's a very variable disease. And that's why it's probably not understood how it should be. So yeah, I think when I ultimately sort of came out the other side of accepting it, it was probably after, you know, Georgie got cancer. And she had spoken out about her journey and shared that. And I had seen actually how talking about something and how helpful that would be to people. And I'd seen an outcry of, like, you know, support for her and really positive stories. And I think you can, you know, if you get, you know, a diagnosis as serious as MS or cancer, you tend to just hunt the negative. And I certainly did that. Not when Georgie was sick though, but when I was sick. And when you go on to Google, which is the worst thing you can do, and everyone says it, you tend to get the negative stuff, not the positive stuff. But I'd seen the positive with Georgie and what had happened, and I kind of, you know, that probably helped me accept what had happened to me and ultimately start to talk about MS and my journey a little bit more.
What was your mental state like during those first initial years after the prognosis? Because MS is, from my understanding, it's a physical.
Yeah. Well, it is. So yes, it's a physical and it's a cognitive, you know, disease as well. It can affect your cognitive function. And it does. Generally, there's a high percentage of people with MS that develop depression as a result.
Because of the breakdown physically?
Yeah. And because of the, just, you know, anyone with any serious critical or long-term illness, not a critical illness, long-term illness, would
Yeah.
experience depression.
Because you can't see the light.
Yeah,
in the
and
tunnel.
you don't know where your course is going to be, how it'll affect you, and you get sent into a dark hole. And like I was that person, but I hid it, and I probably would still go through bouts of that where I think about what has happened to me a lot, and that brings me to a place where I might have low mood for a while, couple of weeks. But I have the tools now, and I have the ability to sort of climb my way out of that hole that I'm in, and I know what to do, and I know what I need to get out of it.
What are some of those tools? Because there's people listening to this podcast right now who are in the dark hole but don't have those at their disposal.
Well, look, I think for me, the biggest healer has been spending time in nature, being outside. And I never before, growing up as a kid, my mum would have been a huge advocate of just being outside. She's an avid gardener. She loves the beach. Loves the countryside. She loves being outdoors. And she'd be a huge advocate for, without actually knowing the healing power of nature, without actually, that generation, my mum's 82, so they wouldn't acknowledge that. But with where we are in life, we understand that. So yeah, that would have been a huge thing for me. And, I at the time when I was diagnosed, I was, I played hockey at quite a high level. But that wasn't ticking the boxes for me. And I started to run, and I started to do a little bit of trail running. And that was hugely cathartic and healing for me. Just spending a lot of time, like an hour and a half, running in the hills, on the trails, spending time with, in the trees, the rivers, just being there and bringing myself into that moment and appreciating the beauty of nature and the awe that you get when you're standing on top of a mountain, because that's a dopamine release you're getting there, and sort of creating those moments for myself has been a huge tool in my journey and in getting out of those dark holes that I said earlier on.
Yeah, it's the connection piece there, isn't it, as well? And
sure,
you're connected to nature, but then there's also the connection to the people that you leaned on for support during those years as well.
Yeah.
Because I understand you were quite early in the relationship with Georgie when all this happened, and how did that have an impact on the relationship then going forward?
Yeah, so we were probably like 18 months, 2 years into that relationship then. She was just incredibly supportive. And like at that point of my journey in life and career and stuff, like I was the alpha, I had the big job. I was, had the big car, had the property, all that sort of stuff. Georgie is much younger than me. So she was kind of only getting established in her career. And she gave everything to me to make sure that I stayed well. She did literally everything. She'd go collect my dry cleaning so I didn't have to go and do it. She would make me dinners. She would just do everything that anyone, I suppose any wife would do for their husband when they're in a bad place. So she was incredibly supportive and just gave me her everything. As she does with a lot of people still, but I'm very appreciative of that. And I suppose when then she got sick, the roles were completely reversed, and that's where I kind of threw myself into making up for lost time, I suppose, if you call it that way.
It was your turn to step up for her then, yeah?
Yeah.
That was obviously a very significant moment or experience for both of you in your life as well, in your early life as well.
Yeah.
Her cancer diagnosis, and at that stage, had you established a better mental health around your own prognosis, and were you, as you reflect back now, were you in a good position to then be able to be the supporter for her and her struggle and her difficulty, or did you still have all this going on and you had to make sure that you were able to manage both?
I still had a lot going on, but I probably had adjusted slightly to managing it, and I was managing it better. And then, like, when she was diagnosed, it was really tough. It was a time of my life where I remember deep happiness just before the cancer kicking in. So to give you context on that, I had taken a redundancy from Spin. You know, I'm very much a family person, right? And my family mean the world to me. And to the point I made earlier about my mother and countryside, we had spotted this house in where we live now, and it was on the edge of Dublin, but it was in the countryside. And I'd always had this kind of dream of buying a house in the country and, you know, looking out in the garden and the fields and cattle and all that sort of stuff, but having the space for kids to roam free and, you know, like my childhood was. So I got to the point where we had seen this house, and I had the option to stay in media. I'd been given the option, like, move to this other job, or you can take a redundancy package. The choice is yours. So I said, well, the redundancy package looks nice and it means I can buy that house. Otherwise, I'm buying a smaller, probably a new apartment or something like that for me and Georgie to move into. So, like, my whole thing was buy the house, do it up. I love a project. I'm a big DIY person. So I was like, this dream of building fences and, you know, fixing the roof and all that sort of stuff, and like creating a family home. And that became a reality because I took the redundancy. I had the money to do it. And I also had a friend at the time who had this startup, and he was like, just come work with me. You're the perfect person for the gig. So I basically stepped from the CEO gig into a COO gig in a kind of a tech startup or a business that was pivoting from being an old school bricks and mortar business into a digital business. And I was the COO there. So there was no real major downtime, but there was a shift from the high pressure, high stakes boardroom, you know, dealing with billionaires, literally billionaires, a number of them, to like just working in a completely different kind of tech environment, as you imagine. You know, there's jellies on every table and it's all like, oh, I might do a bit of work today. Well, that was not what I was used to. So that, you know, when I left, I was like, this is the right decision. We bought the house, everything. We just had the baby. Pia was just born. I have this vivid memory of driving into the driveway, turning in, driving in between the trees. And our house is kind of on the side of a hill. So the lounge window is up quite high, if you can imagine. You turn in, it's like a ranch house. So you're looking up and Georgie's standing at the window, Pia waving Pia's little arm at me, 5 months old. I'm just getting this rush, this wave of like happiness through me that I was like, I haven't fucking felt that in a long time. And that confirmed.
I've made it.
Yeah. And that confirmed all those decisions that I'd made around taking redundancy, moving, buying the house, all that sort of stuff had sort of compounded, and that was the right decision to make. And then, you know, like literally within a week or two of that happening, Georgie was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that's when life became pretty shit again.
It was quite an aggressive cancer, wasn't it?
Her cancer was a thing called triple negative breast cancer, which is slightly more aggressive and it would grow quicker. So its treatment course is different to other types of breast cancers. So yeah, it was obviously a scary moment for us when we got that diagnosis. But we dealt with it really quickly, and she obviously went in for surgery and then had chemo within a couple of months of her diagnosis. But like that, at that point, you know, the darkness had come back again. It was a really tough time to go from such a high to that sort of massive low of like, you have your family, everything is going in the right direction. The decisions you've made to take you there have all paid off. Then boom, gone.
At the same time, you were able to relate to her suffering because you had gone through it yourself some years before that. And I know it's a different disease or different ailment, but all those emotions and feelings were probably quite similar in terms of her own fears and apprehensions about the future, or whether she was going to survive this, or how it was going to have a negative effect on her life, and you were able to meet her there because you had already crossed that bridge, perhaps.
Yeah.
How did that sort of transfer over to her in terms of helping guide her through what I can only imagine an extremely turbulent period in her life, and of course in yours too?
Yeah, I guess unbeknownst to me, when I got my diagnosis, I was actually building some sort of operating system within my mind of how to deal with adversity. So when she got diagnosed, I sort of knew the process. I also knew how she would feel. So she went into that grief mode, I suppose, because I guess you grieve when you get a big diagnosis like that. I think you're going to grieve for your old life at the start. So obviously she didn't face the denial in the way that I did, because the disease was very, prominent, and she had to get the surgery and have to have the chemo, and there's a physical side of that. But I understood the process that she was going to, and I would see her kind of zone out, or maybe not be present as much, and I'd sort of stop and say, "You okay? Talk to me." Turn off the TV and just say, "Look, what's going on?" I had not that Georgie didn't have that, but she didn't have the experience to deal with that with me. So I guess the blessing that I had of the MS at that point was that I had understood, I'd gone through that whole process. One, I knew the medical system, sort of when you're in that sort of diagnosis, when you get a serious diagnosis like that, you can see the process that the doctors go through and, why they do it. And it was very easy for me then to be like, well, okay, let's ask these questions. What about this? Having alternatives, talking to them about stuff, asking them the right questions and getting the right answers that some people may not have had. So having gone through that myself, I knew what to ask. I knew how to navigate that whole first few weeks. And then as a result, when she was into chemo and stuff like that, how to sort of navigate that as best I could. It's not the same, but I had the, pretty solid experience of being diagnosed with a very serious illness to be able to apply my learnings to her journey, if you will.
Yeah, you talk about the grieving process with these experiences, difficult experiences in both your life and Georgie's life. What were some of the things that you lost when MS became part of your life?
Yeah, I suppose you could. Now that I look back on them, they weren't anything of value that I lost. But at the time, I thought that they were things that were important. So stuff like, I was quite a social person at the time. So the ability to not be the last man standing on the dance floor, or be out having the crack, having fun, blowing off some steam, all that sort of the adjustments that I needed to make from a work point of view, status, and I was a very proud person. My job at the time meant pretty much everything to me, bar Georgie. That was it, and how I was doing on my success and my career path. And I felt like that was maybe sort of taken away from me, or would have stunted growth. And that meant a lot to me back then. And I, as I slowed down, things in my career definitely slowed down, and my speed of growth. I was CEO of Spin for 9 years. Generally, I probably should have been CEO of a bigger media brand after 9 years of Spin, and we'd won all the awards. We were the number one station. I'd taken the brand to the top, but I didn't move on. And that's probably my own fault, because I kind of held myself back a little, because I felt, I have MS. I don't know if I can go for the big job, because I'll have to tell people and that I have this, and there may be times where I need to not be working and blah, blah, blah. So those are the things it took from me, but really they're not the important things, when you end up going through then the cancer diagnosis with Georgie and having just had a baby and stuff like that. The perspective shift is massive compared to what it was as a 32-year-old, inverted commas, single man,
Yeah, the perspective shift in terms of you were very driven towards career, and as you mentioned earlier, aspirations to be with RTE or BBC or one of those big firms in the future.
Yeah.
So that perspective changed.
Yeah, hugely. And I would have placed a lot of value on status and things. You know, I drove the big 4-liter V8, and those things were quite important to me, and how I looked, and you know, the clothes I wore, and blah 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 blah. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. I still drive. I still like my nice cars and stuff like that, but I don't place the value on them. They don't give me the satisfaction that they may have used to. Like, they're only small little dopamine hits that you get when you start the car in the morning or whatever, you know, whereby now, you know, we were having this conversation, Georgie and I were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying to, like, when was the moment you felt like the most joy in your life? And it did not involve a thing. It didn't involve a physical anything. It was standing on the top of a ski slope watching my little girl go down doing the pizza snowplow down the mountain for the first time. And like, I was in tears watching that. The pure pride in my face. Like, that was pride, joy, everything came to me at that moment. One, probably because I'm obsessed with mountains. Like my daughter says, "Oh, Dad, look, there's a mountain. Have you been up that one?" But also just to see her blossom and bloom and just be brave. You know, a little 4-year-old set of skis for the first time, just going down the hill, not falling over like I did for weeks when I started skiing. You know, so those are the things that maybe years ago I would have never even thought would mean anything to me.
Yeah,
but
it's almost a gift you've been given through this.
Yeah.
Do you think that's where we're getting it wrong? A lot of, let's say, men in the country sort of conditioned to perform at a high level in order to attain a sense of fulfillment or joy or happiness in their life, where realistically that's not it.
Because, I think, like everything in life, right, we need balance. So I think it's still important to have those things and have the career and all that, but you can't put all the eggs in that basket, and you shouldn't. You should be seeking out experiences and seeking out moments of joy and being mindful with your kids and all that sort of stuff, and not placing as much value on stuff that really doesn't matter. Like, you and I will die one day, and we won't be thinking about the fucking car or the job title or I should have got that promotion or blah 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 on the day we're closing the door. We'll be thinking about, I should have spent more time with my kids. I should have gone on that holiday. I should have gone on that walk on the beach. And I should have built that little Lego house that my daughter wanted me to build. You know, that kind of way. Those are the things that really matter. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But
yeah, it does. I mean, I think we place our values in all the wrong places. And
but we're conditioned to do that. So you have to forgive yourself a little bit for that.
Compassion is required.
Yeah. So there has to be that self-compassion to be able to be like, we're conditioned by, we're hit by advertising all day, every day. We're hit by these messages. We as humans, I feel, sort of look at other people and that guy has that thing. I need that. Like, that's just sort of the human race over the last maybe 200 years.
Yeah.
But 400 years ago, as humans, we weren't really operating like that, or 500 years ago, or whatever. We were just...
You didn't know. You didn't know what someone was doing, 200 miles away. Now we can see it every single day.
By comparing ourselves to others and looking at that sort of stuff, of course we're going to feel like that, if you know what I mean. So I think, there's balance in it, and those things, that's important.
How does the balance show up in your life at the moment as a businessman and as a father and as a husband? How do you? What is a balanced life for you for your own perspective?
Yeah, well, to give you perspective on what it was and what it is now, I'm not an early riser, and I never was, right? So I would come into work, maybe 9, 9:15, when I worked in Spin or in Love and Media Group. But I would go home at 8 and I would eat dinner, and then I'd probably jump on and do another couple of hours. So like my days were definitely 12-hour days, 6 days a week minimum, if not 14. And that is not good. There is no balance there at all. I, threw myself into the career. I was quite young as a CEO. So I jumped in and I said, right, stuff like the hockey and the things, I can't commit to playing that level. I'll drop down a level. I'll show up to one training session a week, and those are the wrong thing. They were the wrong decisions to make, because I didn't understand by putting all my stuff in that place, I was creating massive amount of cortisol in my body, stress all the time. I had no outlet for that. So those were I'd even go into work on some Saturdays. I'd be like, right, there's a few things to do. Jump on 2:00. I'll be back at 6. And I'd do that and I'd get it done. And that helped me stay on top of things. And it definitely progressed my career and helped me achieve what I did at an early age. But now I am very conscious of having the balance, and that I need it for my well-being. And that includes scheduling time, in the week to have a run. My runs are 2 hours, 3 hours out of the house. That's important for me, because I come back a different person. Like Georgie will say to me, when was the last time you went for a run? And I'd be like, oh, it's been a week. I'm too busy. There's been loads of stuff going on. And she's like, that's what's wrong with you. Will you just go? And then I'll come back and I'll be completely different, because while I'm running, and it's different for everyone, it might be a gym session for you. For me, it's out on the mountains, getting covered in muck and being really mindful of not breaking my ankle while I'm running over the top of a hill. And that brings me to a place that's almost meditative, and everything just gets figured out. And I come home and it's different. So I schedule those times to create balance. And I'm just very conscious to be mindful and bring a lot of mindfulness into stuff that I do. So like getting on the floor and making that little Lego house. Doing it, not just doing it quickly, being bored, looking at the phone. I'll do it properly. I'll make my daughter not skip any parts. I'll be like, no, let's make it properly. It's important to do things right, and teaching her that stuff. I would never have that, I would never have had that sort of ability to acknowledge that I need to do that when I was back in Spin, and when I was just going from meeting to meeting and just being busy all the time.
The MS, do you think that if that didn't happen, that you wouldn't have found this balance, or you wouldn't have established this way of living your life now, that you would have continued on this trajectory that potentially would have caused more struggle and strife and stress in your life, only for the MS almost enable you to stop and ask yourself some serious questions about how you're living your life?
Yeah, I mean, it did, and it's a weird thing to say, but I'm like, in a weird way, kind of grateful for that. I kind of am, and not everyone can say that, and I acknowledge that. That's, sometimes people can't accept this, and as an illness, what's happened to them, and it's a very difficult diagnosis to receive. But for me, I can see the bigger picture, and I've always, there's a book, you've probably read it, The Obstacle is the Way. Mm-hmm. And once you acknowledge that the thing that is in your way is actually taking you in a different direction or whatever, and you accept that, then your perspective does shift, and how you deal with whatever challenge that is will be more effective, I think, once you go, okay, well, what's this here to teach me, or why is this happening to me? Not why is this happening to me, why is it happening for me? So yeah, the MS did change my perspective big time, but it shouldn't have been that way. But very often it is. But I think that's now what we try and do within our business and the Good Glow, is sort of create content. Like ultimately, the Good Glow is run the same as a radio station would be run, or a media brand would be run. We just create content that will maybe make people question some things in their lives, and we build that content in a way that we're media people, both Georgie and I, So we have the skills to create stuff that we know is going to work and is going to get the message through. So I have a beautiful life now where I'm able to do that, help people with our journey. You know, both of us have had serious illness diagnosis and got through it. And if that's not going to be for anything, or there's no purpose that comes off the back of that, then it's kind of useless. So in the obstacle is the way, as I said, and you know, that obstacle that is put in our way has become a new path for us, and you know, we're enjoying it.
You also had a very, maybe not a very, but a different obstacle that arose as well. Soon after you got married, when your father passed away, and that's obviously very different than the MS and the cancer diagnosis. And how did that begin to affect your life?
Yeah, so I guess we spoke about this off air, but like in a 5-year period of my life, I was diagnosed with MS. Obviously, that was a serious low. And then, you know, once I processed that a little bit and my relationship with Georgie started to unfold, and I realized that, you know, she was the one, life became happy again and, you know, started to rise. And we got married, and that was the happiest day in my life. And 6 months later, my dad was dead. And at my wedding, I'll always remember people coming up to me and saying, geez, if you look like your dad when you're 60, and actually my dad was 70 at the time, you should be like, I'd marry you, you know, that kind of way. Because my dad looked so well. He was very handsome, big guy, very handsome. He looked amazing. And then 6 months later, he wasn't here anymore. He got a really aggressive form of cancer, and his prognosis was not good from the get-go. Basically, you know, he was told to get his affairs in order once, and that it was inevitable. He never told us that, but that's what happened. And yeah, that was a serious sort of low then. So it go from high to low and high to low over a very short period of time was really tough. But like that, I see life as, you know, a series of mountains and valleys. You know, you work your way up, you climb on top of the mountain, you experience the awe and you know, the beauty up there, and that's the happy moments. And then like inevitably life just happens, so you're going to come down the other side, and you're going to start going down, and that's in the valleys is where all the tough stuff happens. But the next valley is never as tough as the previous one, you know. And it goes like that. Like life is not a straight line. It's mountains and valleys the whole way.
What do you feel you've taken from your father onto your own parenthood as a dad today?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've never really said this, and I don't mind saying it now, but it's like my parents separated when I was very young, and I always sort of had a slight bit of resentment towards my dad for like leaving, and I kind of, that has given me, I guess, a perspective on family and like what's important. And like I will, you know, I felt like, you know, he wasn't there for big moments in my life, and so as a result, I am there for my daughters, all their big moments, and it's really important to me, like that I spend time on the floor making the Lego or doing the stuff, taking Pia to school, collecting her, going to her hockey training. All this stuff is like, they're the big moments for me. And that in a weird way, like what happened with my parents has given me that sort of massive perspective on what family is and what it should be, and, you know, how I, you know, run my family, or, you know.
It's like, I often say this to the men now, perhaps a different situation, different circumstances, say whatever you've been deprived of in the past, you'll want to cultivate in the present. Yeah. And it seems like that's something you're beginning to do as a father, or are doing as a father, and with your two daughters.
Yeah, it's my two daughters are like literally they're the apple of my eye, and it's I'll do anything for them. And it's like I said, my dad was an amazing father as well. Like I'm not saying that he wasn't, but yeah, he certainly what happened there made me sort of make a commitment to myself to commit to fatherhood and be like the best dad I could possibly be. Not that my dad wasn't. My dad did so much for me, and I have experiences with my dad that are just absolutely out of this world, incredible. And my dad was a very kind of humble man, and he was but he was strong and he was firm, and but he also wore his heart in his sleeve. And my dad also, it was actually a really important thing. I was talking to my brother about it. We were skiing there at the weekend, and he was saying, we were talking about my dad's career, and he was quite successful and stuff, but he actually never wanted to be in that job. He wanted to be something else. Like, my dad was an accountant, and he was a finance guy, and he worked in one of the big corporates. But, when he was a young man, he was racing motorbikes in the hills, and he was like a biker. So, and actually all he wanted to do was be an engineer and get into that. But his parents were kind of funny about that kind of career and all that sort of stuff. And my dad was always able to fix stuff. And you could see that when his eyes lit up when he was given some sort of a mechanical challenge to sort out. You never saw that in him until he was given those things. And like, that shouldn't have been the way, And so for me, that's the sort of logic that I'm applying now to my life, is that, like, live your truth as a man.
Yeah.
And, driving the nice cars and all that sort of stuff ticked a box for me for a while, but actually I'm happier now not doing that, spending time with my daughter, living somewhere that we have a good life and we're happy.
Mm-hmm. We're sort of speaking about fatherhood here, and you've got 2 daughters, and I heard you speaking on one of the podcasts before and described yourself as quite a protective father, or very, very protective of Pia, and obviously your new daughter as well.
Yeah.
What do you feel as fathers, listening to this podcast as a father myself, that we need to protect them from?
Well, the world they're growing up in is a very different world to the world that we grew up in. I think technology has brought that, and obviously technology is needed for everything to evolve and for the world to evolve and stuff like that. So I like you said earlier on, 400 or 500 years ago, people didn't know stuff, so they didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
Now, kids are open to so much communication and so much information. It's very hard for them to navigate the world. And I see it even with my brother's kids. They're slightly older. And I saw that when they were growing up, like, Jesus, they're going to have to deal with phones. The access to information and the access to communication is so much bigger than it was when we were kids. So for me, trying to not like manage my 2 daughters around that will be the biggest sort of challenge, and make them understand life in as they go through it. Make them understand that looking outwards isn't always a great thing, and that being happy inside is the main thing, and not look, like we spoke about earlier, that sort of want of what other people have and all that sort of stuff. And that kind of stuff can make you feel like a lesser person and all that sort of stuff. So we talk to Pia about that a lot. She reads a lot of books, little books about mindfulness, like Brezi's books and things like that, which have been really helpful. And you can see it in her. Like, she's one of the kids in her class. We get all the reports. They're like, Pia's a love. If someone falls in the class, Pia is over to them, immediately picking them up, bringing them. If a kid falls in the yard, she's the one that goes to them straight away and brings them to the teacher. So in a way that makes me very proud, and makes me go, well, must be doing something right, because that is the right thing to do.
It's like what we spoke about earlier, the human connection. That's so vital and important for our species and for survival and for thriving even. We're becoming all the more connected to devices and social media and AI when that really gets its grips on us. But if we can really understand what is truly fulfilling and truly important to us in life, which is real life human connection, then I think we'll always veer towards that versus the other. And that comes from your own journey, from your own values as well, in terms of, as you mentioned, into nature, the running, the hills, doing all those things.
And that can be hard, right? Like
oh yeah.
We were to do this podcast a couple of weeks ago and you cancelled. I kind of felt relieved because I didn't have to fucking go anywhere and talk to someone, that kind of way. But again, there's no growth in that, or there's no, so, today did I think if Gav cancels, will I have a problem with it? Part of me was like, probably not.
Yeah.
But, or maybe I cancel, that kind of way. So it's hard. It's harder. It's easier to hide away.
The resistance is there, yeah.
Yeah, and it's easier to get stuck into the phone and scroll and not go outside your comfort zone. But I think it's important to just keep hammering that message home that like that it's outside of the comfort zone that where all the good stuff happens.
Yeah.
Nothing good happens 4 hours into scrolling through Instagram.
Yeah.
Like I'm victim of it myself, but I know it's not good.
Yeah.
And I know I need to get out of it. And I need to push myself and I need to step outside my comfort zone and do those things, because I'll walk out of here today now a little bit lighter, shoulders up, feeling good because I've met you and we're connecting and there's a little bit of something there, and who knows where that might go in the future, that kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's, I say to my daughter's 13 and she's obviously in a very turbulent stage in her life, teenage years and hormones and changing schools, changing friend groups, and, devices are quite prominent in her life at the moment. But the message is this, that like you will 100% always feel better if you're connecting to nature or humans versus connecting to your phone or connecting to your computer or connecting to Roblox. These virtual connections are not fulfilling. If anything, they create a void. And
I was just about to say the word empty. They're
Yeah.
empty connections.
They are.
Whereby the other stuff is meaningful, and it's a sort of, you'll always walk away from those other connections feeling lighter and feeling better.
But she's watching, and you're the daughter. They're watching what you're doing, and they will follow what they see, not what they're being told ultimately. So I know that Georgie as well is big into her fitness now as well. And as you mentioned, she was getting up at 6:30 this morning going for a run, and Pia's seeing that, and it'll inspire her to make certain moves, and she'll witness her mum coming back much happier and feeling more fulfilled after doing things like this, as much as yourself coming back from skiing or coming back from your runs. And you start to understand, oh, actually, there's something really valuable in this. And I think that's the message to a lot of the men and husbands or fathers of today. It's act in the way which you would like your children to act now or in the future. You know.
And the best thing about that stuff is that's all free.
Yeah.
All the value is in the free stuff. You know what I mean? This is free. Going for a walk, going for a hike, going for a run, that's all the free stuff. All the other stuff is actually not as helpful, and there's a cost to it.
Yeah. A monetary cost and an emotional cost and a physical cost as well. Yeah. So, well, Jamie, I love this conversation, and as you said, brilliant to meet you as well and have this connection with you. And as you said, who knows where this might go? Yeah. And again, big admiration, massive admiration for all you've overcome in your own life and how you are stepping up as the man, as the father, as the husband in your life today. And as I said to the beginning of this podcast or before we start recording, this country and this world needs more of it, because as much as myself and every other man, like, we often fail on these objectives, let's say, for want of a better term, of being the husband and being the father for our children as well. So thank you for this, and I will continue to be inspired and follow your good work, and of course Georgie as well. And for everyone listening to the podcast here, where can they reach out to you or find you or get involved in the Good Glow movement? Let us know.
You can get me on Instagram at Jamie Crawford 11, and then info@thegoodglow.ie for a bit more. And our podcasts are everywhere, all the platforms. And listen,
smashing it.
Thanks for having me, and keep up the good work you're doing. You're doing some great work, and I really have a lot of respect for people like yourself who step outside and stand up for what they believe in, and then do this kind of work. So congrats and keep it going.
I appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.